She was mocked, underestimated, and pushed aside by those who thought they knew her place. They laughed at her ambition, belittled her ideas, and thought she would never rise above them. But what they didn't see coming? A woman with the power to change everything. Watch as the world turns upside down and they're left speechless when she claims what's rightfully hers. This is the story of betrayal, revenge, and the ultimate rise to power. You won't believe how this ends. Stay tuned, because this is a journey you won't want to miss. Jasmine Harper sat at her desk, the faint hum of fluorescent lights overhead the only sound in the otherwise quiet office. The computer screen in front of her glowed with the final drafts of a marketing proposal she had worked on tirelessly for the past week. She had poured every ounce of her energy into it, crafting ideas that she believed would make the firm stand out in a competitive industry. Yet despite her dedication, there was a sinking feeling in her chest, a feeling she had come to know all too well. It was the feeling of being invisible, of being overlooked in a place where her talents seemed to be nothing more than an afterthought. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, typing and deleting sentences, unsure of what she was doing wrong. She wasn't new to the firm. She had been working at the prestigious marketing agency for almost 3 years, yet her dreams of moving up the corporate ladder felt more distant with each passing day. She had been passed over for promotions twice now, both times to colleagues with less experience and fewer credentials. They were men, they were white, they were louder, more confident, more willing to step on others to climb higher. Jasmine knew she had the skills. She knew she was just as capable, if not more. But every time she spoke up in meetings, she was drowned out, her ideas discarded with a polite smile, as if they weren't worth considering. Her thoughts were interrupted by a voice that sent a shiver down her spine. Victoria, the senior executive who had always treated Jasmine with thinly veiled disdain. Victoria's presence loomed in the doorway of her cubicle, her sharp eyes assessing Jasmine with an almost predatory gaze. "Jasmine, I need you to present your proposal in the team meeting this afternoon," Victoria said, her voice dripping with condescension. "Make sure it's perfect. We don't need any more misunderstandings, do we?" Jasmine forced a smile, nodding curtly. She had been through this before. Victoria had a way of making her feel like her best efforts were never quite good enough, no matter how hard she tried. It wasn't the first time she had been asked to present something, only to be ignored or belittled once it was her turn to speak. But this time Jasmine wasn't going to let it slide. She had worked too hard for this moment. As she prepared her notes, she could feel the weight of eyes on her. It wasn't just Victoria. Travis, a charming yet calculating colleague who had somehow found his way to the top, despite his lack of real substance, was watching her too. He smirked as he passed by, making a point to glance at her screen. The condescending little comment that followed was inevitable. "Are you sure that's going to work, Jasmine?" Travis said, his tone just the right mix of faux concern and mockery. "I mean, you do know that this is a big client, right?" Jasmine's grip on her pen tightened, but she didn't respond. She had learned long ago that engaging with Travis only led to more ridicule. He thrived on it, and she wasn't about to give him the satisfaction. She had more important things to focus on, like proving them wrong. The meeting room was a stark contrast to the quiet of her desk. The room hummed with the low murmur of voices as her colleagues settled in. She could already feel the tension mounting in her chest as she took her place at the front of the room. She knew what was coming. The same cold stares, the same barely concealed judgment. But she had made a promise to herself. She would not shrink back. She would not be small. Victoria sat with her arms crossed, her lips curled into a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Travis was leaning back in his chair, his gaze fixed on his phone, clearly uninterested in what Jasmine had to say. She could almost hear the whispers in their minds, the doubts they already had about her abilities. Taking a deep breath, Jasmine launched into her presentation. She spoke with authority, her voice steady despite the nervous knot in her stomach. The ideas she presented were solid, innovative, strategic, and backed by months of research. She could see the flickers of recognition from a few of her colleagues, those who had always quietly supported her, but the others remained unmoved. The resistance in the room was palpable. As she finished, there was a brief silence before Victoria spoke up, her voice laced with thinly veiled criticism. Interesting ideas, Jasmine, she said, glancing down at her notes. But I'm not sure we're quite there yet. Maybe you should go back and refine a few things. Perhaps take another look at the competition. We can't afford any missteps with this client. Her eyes locked onto Jasmine's. I think we'll pass for now. Jasmine's heart sank. It was the same old story. She had given everything she had, and it still wasn't enough. The weight of rejection threatened to crush her, but she refused to let it show. She stood tall, forcing a smile even as her thoughts screamed in frustration. They didn't understand. They never would. As the meeting wrapped up, she gathered her things, feeling the familiar sting of defeat. She had tried, but it was clear she wasn't going to get the recognition she deserved here, not from people like Victoria or Travis, who thrived on putting others down to lift themselves up. She left the room with her head held high, but inside a storm was brewing. She wouldn't let them win. Not this time. Later that day, back at her desk, Jasmine stared at her computer screen, the familiar anger rising within her. It wasn't just about the promotion anymore. It was about respect. She had been humiliated again, but something had shifted in her. She was tired of being the quiet one, the invisible one. Maybe it was time to change the narrative. She wasn't just going to take it anymore, she was done being their doormat. She pulled up the proposal again, but this time her focus wasn't just on making it perfect for them. It was for her. And if they didn't see it, if they didn't recognize her value, then it was their loss. But she wasn't going to stop until they did. She had a lot to prove, and this time she would make them notice. The following days were a blur of work, frustration, and quiet determination. Jasmine's resolve had only grown stronger since that meeting. She spent hours refining her proposal, tweaking every detail until it was something she could truly be proud of. It was no longer about impressing Victoria or Travis. It was about proving to herself that she had what it took to rise above the toxic atmosphere of the office. She noticed a shift in herself. The self-doubt that had always plagued her, the nagging thought that maybe she wasn't good enough, began to fade. Jasmine had spent too long trying to prove her worth to people who didn't value her. But now, it wasn't about them. It was about her. And she was done being afraid to take up space. The next opportunity came sooner than she expected. The company was in the middle of a crucial pitch for a major client. And as luck would have it, the original project lead had to take an unexpected leave of absence. Victoria was quick to assign the task to Jasmine, her tone dripping with barely concealed condescension. "Jasmine," Victoria said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, "I'm sure you'll do fine with this. Just make sure everything goes according to plan. This could really make or break the firm's reputation." She handed Jasmine a file with the project details, her expression almost as if she were doing Jasmine a favor. Jasmine held the file in her hands, staring at it for a moment. This was it, the moment she'd been waiting for. She wasn't going to let Victoria's patronizing attitude stop her. In fact, she would use it. She would show them all that she wasn't just some token employee who could be dismissed when they felt like it. Over the next few days, Jasmine dove into the project with laser focus. She immersed herself in every detail of the client's needs, their preferences, and the market trends. She knew this wasn't just another project, it was her chance to prove that she was more than capable, that she had the vision and the leadership skills to take the firm to new heights. As she worked, she could feel a sense of excitement bubbling up inside her. This was her time and she wasn't going to waste it. Victoria, meanwhile, seemed to be keeping a close eye on her, though Jasmine could sense that the senior executive wasn't taking her seriously. She could almost see the doubt in Victoria's eyes every time they crossed paths, as if the idea that Jasmine might succeed was something unthinkable. Jasmine continued to push forward, determined to make an impact. She could hear the whispers around the office, the subtle snickers behind her back, but they no longer bothered her. She knew what she was capable of. It was only a matter of time before they saw it too. As the day of the pitch approached, Jasmine felt a familiar sense of nerves rising in her chest. But this time, they weren't accompanied by the crippling self-doubt she had once felt. No, this time, the nerves were the kind that came with anticipation, with excitement for the opportunity to show what she could do. She walked into the conference room that afternoon, head held high. The atmosphere in the room was tense, but there was a quiet confidence in her step. She was ready. Her presentation was flawless. Every detail meticulously planned. Every strategy backed by solid research. She knew the client's needs inside and out, and she had crafted a vision for their future that was bold and innovative. Victoria was sitting at the head of the table, arms crossed and a slight smirk on her face. Travis was there too, sitting off to the side, his eyes scanning his phone with the same dismissive attitude he always had. They thought Jasmine would stumble. They thought she was a temporary placeholder, someone to clean up the mess until the real players took over. As Jasmine began her presentation, she could feel the eyes of the room on her. Her words flowed with confidence, her voice steady and strong. Every idea she presented resonated with the client, every detail landing perfectly. She could see the shift happening as the room grew more and more engaged. For the first time in a long time, Jasmine felt like she was in control. But then, as expected, Victoria interrupted. "I think you're missing the point, Jasmine," Victoria said, her tone laced with that familiar edge of superiority. "The client is looking for something more polished. This is too risky. We need to focus on something more conventional." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat, but she didn't flinch. She had been prepared for this moment. Instead of backing down, she leaned forward slightly, meeting Victoria's gaze with a quiet intensity. "Actually, Victoria," Jasmine said calmly, "what the client needs is something bold. The market is shifting, and they need to stay ahead of the competition. What we're offering is exactly what they're asking for." There was a brief silence in the room, and for a moment, Jasmine could see the flicker of doubt in Victoria's eyes. She had caught her off guard. It wasn't often that anyone dared to challenge her, especially not someone like Jasmine. The client, who had been watching the exchange closely, spoke up, their voice clear and decisive. "We like this. It's fresh. It's exactly what we need." Victoria's face flushed, but Jasmine didn't give her a chance to recover. She continued with the presentation, moving forward with her strategy, outlining every detail with the precision of someone who had been preparing for this moment for years. When the meeting finally ended, Jasmine could feel the weight of the victory settle over her. The client was on board, and Jasmine had earned their trust. But more than that, she had proved to herself, and to Victoria and Travis, that she was more than just a figurehead. She was a force to be reckoned with. As the room emptied, Jasmine felt the familiar eyes of Victoria and Travis on her, but this time, there was no mockery, only begrudging respect. Jasmine had made her mark, and she wasn't going to let them forget it. Her heart raced with a mixture of triumph and anticipation. This was just the beginning. The days following the pitch were a whirlwind. Jasmine's success was the talk of the office, and though she tried to keep a low profile, she could feel the shift in how people treated her. Colleagues who had once ignored her now stopped by her desk with compliments, even offering to help her with future projects. It was a strange feeling, but Jasmine couldn't shake the nagging thought that it was all temporary. She had proven herself once, but was that enough to make her a permanent fixture in the firm's hierarchy? Victoria, however, had been noticeably distant. Her polite smile seemed more forced now, and Jasmine could feel the tension whenever their paths crossed in the office. She wasn't sure what Victoria was thinking, but there was a coldness in her eyes that suggested Jasmine had stepped on some toes. Jasmine had no intention of backing down. If anything, the subtle hostility only made her more determined to succeed. The real test came when Jasmine was invited to a closed-door meeting with the senior management team. The invitation came directly from the CEO, Robert Langley, a man whose presence was as commanding as his reputation. Jasmine had heard rumors about his tough demeanor and his no-nonsense approach to business. People respected him, feared him even. She entered the meeting room with a mix of excitement and apprehension. The room was filled with the senior executives, all of whom were watching her closely as she took her seat at the table. Robert Langley sat at the head, his eyes sharp as they assessed her. "Jasmine, I've been hearing good things about your work lately," Robert said, his voice gravelly and commanding. "You've done a solid job with the recent client pitch, but now we need someone who can lead our next big campaign. We're putting you in charge of it." Jasmine's heart skipped a beat. This was it. The opportunity she had been waiting for. To prove that her success wasn't just a fluke, that she had the skills to lead a team, to carry the firm's future on her shoulders. "I won't let you down," Jasmine said, her voice steady, though the nerves were buzzing inside her. Robert nodded, a small smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Good. But there's more. I've been keeping an eye on you, Jasmine. You've got potential. I want you to know that." For a moment, she thought she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a spark of genuine approval. But before she could process it, the meeting took a sharp turn. Victoria, who had been sitting silently by Robert's side, cleared her throat. "Robert, I believe we've had this discussion before," Victoria said, her voice smooth but laced with something else. "Resentment, perhaps? Jasmine has done well in the past, but I'm not sure she's ready for such a big responsibility. It's a lot to take on, especially for someone who's only been here a few years." The words hung in the air, sharp and pointed. Jasmine felt her blood run cold. It was clear what Victoria was doing, trying to undermine her at the first opportunity. She was questioning Jasmine's ability, trying to plant seeds of doubt in Robert's mind. Jasmine could feel the pressure mounting. This was the moment where she would either sink or swim. She wasn't going to let Victoria or anyone else define her limits. With a calm that surprised even herself, Jasmine spoke up. "Actually, Victoria, I believe I'm more than ready," Jasmine said, meeting her eyes with a challenge in her gaze. "I've worked hard to get here, and I'm ready to take on whatever you throw at me. If you think I can't handle it, then I'll prove you wrong." The silence that followed was palpable. Jasmine could see the shock on Victoria's face as her words sank in. She had never spoken to her like this before. There was no backing down now. Robert, however, seemed impressed. His gaze shifted between Jasmine and Victoria, and after a long moment he spoke again. "I like your confidence, Jasmine," he said, nodding slowly. "You're in charge of the campaign. Let's see what you can do." Victoria's smile faltered, and Jasmine could see the flicker of anger behind her eyes. But there was nothing she could do. Robert had made his decision. Jasmine had won this battle. As the meeting adjourned, Jasmine felt a rush of triumph flood through her. She had faced down Victoria's attempts to sabotage her and come out on top. It wasn't just a victory for the campaign. It was a victory for herself, a clear sign that she wasn't going to let anyone hold her back. But as Jasmine made her way back to her desk, the adrenaline of the meeting still buzzing in her veins, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming. She had taken a major step forward, but there were always forces lurking in the background, waiting for an opportunity to strike. She had earned Robert's trust, but that didn't mean the road ahead would be smooth. If anything, the real test was just beginning. Victoria had been humiliated, and Jasmine knew that the senior executive wouldn't forget it. But it didn't matter. Jasmine was ready for whatever came next. She was no longer the quiet, overlooked employee. She had proven that she was a force to be reckoned with. And now, she would show them all that nothing, not even the most powerful people in the firm, could stand in her way. As she sat down at her desk, her phone buzzed with a message. It was from Sandra, her trusted mentor. "You did it. Now go make them all regret ever doubting you." Jasmine smiled to herself. She was just getting started. The following weeks were a blur of strategy meetings, late nights, and constant pressure. Jasmine threw herself into the new campaign, knowing that this was her chance to solidify her place in the firm. Every detail mattered. Every decision she made, every presentation she gave, and every idea she pitched. The weight of responsibility was immense, but she felt a thrill in the challenge. a drive that she had never experienced before. She was determined to make this campaign a success, not just for the company, but for herself. She knew that the eyes of the entire firm were on her now. Victoria, though still outwardly cordial, hadn't let go of the simmering resentment. Jasmine could feel it in the air whenever they interacted. The coldness in Victoria's words had become more biting, her passive-aggressive comments more frequent. But Jasmine didn't care. She had a goal, and she was focused on it. Victoria's attempts to undermine her only fueled her fire. One afternoon, while Jasmine was reviewing the campaign's final presentation, she received an unexpected message. It was from Robert Langley, the CEO. A brief text, just a few words, but it sent a surge of excitement through her. "Jasmine, I need to speak with you. Can you come by my office in an hour?" Her heart skipped a beat. She had been working tirelessly, but this felt different. She couldn't help but wonder what this meeting would bring. Was Robert going to praise her for the progress? Or was this the moment when everything she had worked for came crashing down? Jasmine quickly gathered her materials, took a deep breath, and made her way to the executive floor. The elevator doors opened, and she stepped out into the sleek, polished hallway. Her footsteps echoed as she walked toward Robert's office, her mind racing with possibilities. She knocked on the door, and Robert's deep voice called out, "Come in." She entered and closed the door behind her. Robert sat at his desk, looking up from his computer with a smile that seemed genuine, yet there was something unreadable in his eyes. "Jasmine, sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. Jasmine did as instructed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She couldn't read his expression. The tension in the room was palpable. "I wanted to speak with you about your progress on the campaign," Robert began, his voice calm but firm. "I've been watching closely and I'm impressed with what I've seen so far. You've done a good job, but there's one thing I need to address." Jasmine's stomach tightened. One thing? What was it? Her mind raced, running through all the possible mistakes or missteps she might have made. She had been meticulous, but the pressure of perfection was always there, always looming. Robert continued, his gaze steady. "I've heard some concerns from the senior team about your approach. There are those who feel you're being too aggressive with the direction you're taking. Too risky." Jasmine's pulse quickened. She knew exactly what this was. Victoria had gone to Robert, no doubt trying to plant seeds of doubt in his mind. It wasn't just about the campaign anymore. It was about her. Victoria had seen the writing on the wall. Jasmine was rising, and she wasn't going to let that happen without a fight. Jasmine didn't let the frustration show on her face. She took a deep breath and spoke, her voice steady. "Robert, I've worked closely with the team on this. The direction I'm taking is the right one. The market is shifting and we can't afford to play it safe. If we want to lead, we need to innovate. I believe in this vision." There was a long silence as Robert studied her. Jasmine could feel the weight of the moment, the pressure to convince him, to make him believe in her. She wasn't going to let Victoria's whispers derail everything she had worked for. Finally, Robert spoke. "I respect your conviction, Jasmine. I do. But you need to understand that the company has a certain way of doing things, and not everyone is on board with your approach. You'll need to win them over if you want to succeed." Jasmine nodded, her mind racing. She had expected resistance, but this felt different. It wasn't just about the campaign anymore. It was about her leadership. Robert was testing her. He wanted to see if she could rise above the doubt, if she could make her case and rally the team behind her. "I understand," Jasmine said, her voice firm. "I'll do whatever it takes. I'll make them see the value in this direction. I won't back down." Robert smiled, a glint of approval in his eyes. "Good. I'm glad to hear it. I think you're on the right track, Jasmine. Keep pushing forward, and don't let anyone tell you that you can't do this." Her heart swelled with a mixture of pride and determination. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Robert had given her the green light, but the battle wasn't over. If anything, it was just beginning. As Jasmine left his office, she felt the weight of his words settle over her. She had earned his trust, but now it was time to prove herself once again. Not just to Robert, but to everyone who doubted her. The road ahead would be filled with challenges, but she was ready. She returned to her desk, more determined than ever. Victoria's snide remarks were nothing compared to the fire burning inside her now. Jasmine had the backing she needed. She had the vision, and most importantly, she had the strength to see it through. But as she dove back into her work, one thought lingered in her mind. Victoria wasn't going to let this go. If anything, her defeat had made her more dangerous. And Jasmine knew that whatever came next, it was going to be a fight. The tension in the office only grew stronger as the days passed. Jasmine knew that the decision to keep her in charge of the campaign had ruffled feathers. Victoria had been unusually quiet, but Jasmine could feel the simmering resentment in the air. It was only a matter of time before the senior executive made her move, and Jasmine was ready for whatever came next. She had faced worse before. This wasn't the first time she had been doubted, and it wouldn't be the last. But this time was different. This time, she wasn't going to let anyone push her aside. The campaign was in full swing now. Jasmine's team was working around the clock, and despite the challenges, things were falling into place. She had made sure to involve everyone, delegating tasks and ensuring that each team member felt valued. They worked together seamlessly, the energy in the room contagious as they brainstormed, strategized, and executed. Jasmine had transformed the once divisive environment into one of unity and purpose. The vision she had for the campaign was beginning to take shape, and she knew that the client would be blown away. But as Jasmine sat at her desk, reviewing the final presentation, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The quiet whispers in the halls, the strange looks from some of her colleagues. It was clear that not everyone was on her side. Travis, in particular, seemed to have been growing more distant, his passive-aggressive comments becoming harder to ignore. Then, one afternoon, it happened. Jasmine was in a meeting with her team, going over the final touches of the presentation, when she was interrupted by a sharp knock on the door. The sound sliced through the air, cutting the conversation short. Jasmine looked up to find Victoria standing in the doorway, her arms crossed, her gaze cold. "I need to speak with you, Jasmine," Victoria said, her tone tight with barely concealed contempt. "Now." Jasmine felt a wave of unease wash over her. She stood up, her mind racing. She had been waiting for this moment, but she hadn't expected it to come so soon. With a quick glance at her team, she stepped out of the meeting room and followed Victoria down the hallway. The office felt suffocating, the silence between them almost unbearable. Victoria led her to a conference room at the far end of the office, the door clicking shut behind them as she turned to face Jasmine. The tension in the air was palpable, a silent battle of wills. Victoria's lips curled into a thin smile, but there was nothing kind about it. "You think you've done something impressive, don't you?" Victoria said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You think you're leading this campaign, that you're somehow the answer to all of the firm's problems." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "But the reality is that you're out of your depth, Jasmine. You'll never be taken seriously in this company." Jasmine's jaw tightened. She could feel the anger rising, but she held it back. She wasn't going to give Victoria the satisfaction of seeing her riled up. Instead, she stood tall, meeting her gaze with a quiet defiance. "I've earned my place here, Victoria," Jasmine said, her voice calm but firm. "And I'm going to finish this campaign on my terms. I'm not going anywhere." Victoria's eyes narrowed, the tension between them thickening. "You think that because you've pulled a few strings, you've made some waves, that you can just waltz into this firm and take over? You're nothing but a pawn in a game that's far beyond your comprehension." Jasmine's heart beat faster, but she refused to let her emotions show. "I don't need your approval, Victoria," she said, her voice steady. "I'm not trying to take over anything. I'm just here to do my job, and I'm doing it well. The campaign is going to succeed, with or without your endorsement." Victoria laughed bitterly. the sound sharp and unforgiving. You really believe that, don't you? You're just a cog in a much larger machine, and no matter how much you push, no matter how much you try to prove yourself, you'll never be more than that. Jasmine felt a flash of anger, but she pushed it down. She had learned long ago that people like Victoria thrived on getting a rise out of others. She wasn't going to give her that satisfaction. Instead, Jasmine took a step closer, her eyes locking onto Victoria's with unyielding resolve. "Maybe I'm just a cog," Jasmine said, her voice low but firm. "But I'm the one turning the wheels. And without me, this campaign would fall apart. You may think you've won, but you're wrong. The company will see that." For a moment, Victoria was silent, her face hardening as she absorbed Jasmine's words. Then, with a sharp breath, she turned and walked toward the door. "This isn't over, Jasmine," she said, her voice cold. "You'll see." Jasmine stood there watching Victoria leave, her pulse still racing. The weight of the confrontation hung in the air, but there was a sense of relief too. She had stood her ground. She hadn't let Victoria shake her confidence. It felt like a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. As the door closed behind her, Jasmine took a deep breath and turned back to her desk. She had learned something in that moment. Something important. Victoria was only one part of the equation. Jasmine knew that the real battle wasn't just about the campaign, it was about proving herself, and she wasn't going to let anyone, not even Victoria, stand in her way. But as she sat down and began to review the presentation again, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a warning. The storm was far from over. If Victoria could strike like that in private, there was no telling what she might do next. Jasmine wasn't going to let her guard down. She was ready for whatever came next. Jasmine spent the next few days immersed in work, pushing past the lingering frustration from her confrontation with Victoria. It had been tense, but the words from that meeting echoed in her mind. "You're out of your depth. You'll never be taken seriously." Victoria's poison had been bitter, but it only fueled Jasmine's determination. She refused to let those words define her. The campaign was at a critical stage now. The final presentation was fast approaching, and Jasmine was in overdrive. She worked closely with her team, refining every detail, making sure everything was polished and aligned with the client's expectations. The pressure was mounting, but Jasmine thrived on it. She knew she was on the verge of something big, something that could change everything. But the stakes had never been higher. It wasn't just about winning the client's approval anymore. It was about securing her place in the firm, proving that she wasn't just the token employee that Victoria and Travis seemed to think she was. This was her shot at proving that she belonged here, that she could lead, and that she could outshine the very people who had tried to hold her back. As the day of the presentation approached, Jasmine found herself facing not just external pressure, but an internal battle as well. She had come a long way from the unsure woman who had been humiliated in front of her colleagues. But was she truly ready to take that final step, to lead with the authority she had always known she possessed? Every decision she made, every word she spoke felt heavier now. Her office was eerily quiet one afternoon as she reviewed her notes. The hum of the fluorescent lights, the tapping of her keyboard, and the soft rustling of papers were the only sounds in the room. She hadn't noticed the time passing until a knock on her door pulled her from her thoughts. It was Sandra, her trusted mentor, and Jasmine felt a sense of relief wash over her. Sandra had always been the one person in the office who truly believed in her abilities, who offered advice without judgment. Jasmine had leaned on her for support throughout the months of doubt, and now, more than ever, she needed that support. "You look like you're carrying the weight of the world, Jasmine," Sandra said, her voice warm but tinged with concern. She stepped inside and sat down across from Jasmine. "Talk to me. How are you holding up?" Jasmine hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to explain the storm that was swirling inside her. "I'm fine," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Just a lot on my plate. You know how it is." Sandra raised an eyebrow. "I've seen that look before. You're overthinking. You've been working tirelessly, and I can see the strain on you. What's really going on? Jasmine let out a long breath, pushing aside the nagging doubts that had been gnawing at her. I just don't know if I'm ready, Sandra. I've made it this far, but what if I'm not good enough? What if the campaign falls apart? What if everyone's just waiting for me to fail? Sandra smiled gently, her eyes full of understanding. You've made it this far, Jasmine, because you are good enough. You've proven that time and time again. The fact that you're questioning yourself right now only shows how far you've come. It's not about being perfect. It's about trusting yourself. You've got this. Jasmine felt the weight in her chest loosen slightly as Sandra's words sank in. She had heard it before, her own internal voice reminding her that she was capable. But hearing it from Sandra, someone who had been in her corner since the beginning, brought her a sense of peace she hadn't realized she needed. I don't want to let everyone down, Jasmine admitted quietly. Not the team, not Robert, not even Victoria, even though, well, you know how that's been. Sandra's smile softened. You don't owe Victoria anything, Jasmine. She doesn't define your worth, and neither does anyone else. The people who matter see your value. You've already proven yourself. All that's left now is to finish what you started and do it your way. Lead, like you've always known how. Jasmine let out a slow breath, the tension in her shoulders easing. She knew that Sandra was right. This wasn't about proving anything to Victoria or Travis or anyone else. This was about her. She had earned her place. She had worked for this. And now it was time to finish strong. As Sandra left her office, Jasmine felt a renewed sense of clarity. She wasn't going to second-guess herself anymore. She wasn't going to shrink under the weight of fear or doubt. The team was counting on her, and most importantly, she was counting on herself. That evening, Jasmine worked late into the night, perfecting the presentation. It was her masterpiece. Every slide, every point, every detail, meticulously crafted with the utmost care. As she stepped back to look at the finished product, she felt a sense of pride that was unlike anything she had experienced before. This wasn't just a campaign, it was the culmination of everything she had worked for. The morning of the presentation arrived, and the office buzzed with nervous energy. Jasmine walked into the conference room, her heart pounding in her chest. She glanced around at the faces of the senior team, including Robert Langley, who sat at the head of the table. There was no turning back now. Victoria was seated nearby, her expression unreadable, though Jasmine could feel the weight of her gaze. Travis sat next to her, his usual cocky grin replaced with an air of tension. It was clear that they were all watching her, waiting to see what she would do next. But Jasmine stood tall, her posture straight, her mind focused. She was ready. The work was done. Now it was time to show them all who she was. As she began the presentation, her voice was steady, confident, and unwavering. The room fell silent as she spoke, her words cutting through the tension with a clarity and authority that commanded attention. She was no longer just a cog in the machine. She was leading it, steering it toward success. By the time she finished, Jasmine felt like a weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She had done it, she had delivered. And as the room erupted into applause, she knew one thing for certain. This was her moment. She had earned it. But even as she basked in the victory, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was still coming. There was still one last test ahead, and Jasmine was ready. The following days were a blur of congratulations, high fives, and handshakes. The campaign had been a resounding success, and the client had signed on without hesitation. Jasmine could feel the shift in the office. The respect she had longed for was finally there. Her colleagues now looked at her with a new recognition, no longer dismissing her as just another employee. She had proven herself in a way that could not be ignored. Even Robert Langley had taken a moment to personally thank her for her work, praising her leadership and vision. It felt like a dream come true. Jasmine had finally arrived. She had earned her place at the table, and she wasn't about to let anyone take it from her. But amid the celebrations, a new kind of tension lingered in the air. It wasn't the kind of tension that came from doubt or insecurity. Those feelings had been long buried. No, this was the kind of tension that came from knowing that there were people in the office who didn't want to admit they had been wrong, people who had underestimated her, and now had to face the consequences of their own pride. Victoria was the first to show her true colors. She had been polite, almost too polite, ever since the success of the campaign. But Jasmine could see it in her eyes. There was no forgiveness there, only a simmering resentment. Victoria's facade of professionalism was cracking, and Jasmine was only too aware of the power dynamics at play. It was clear that Victoria wasn't about to let her defeat go unnoticed. She had been the one who tried to discredit Jasmine, who had questioned her ability every step of the way. And now, Jasmine had not only proven her wrong, but she had also secured a place for herself in the company that Victoria had once believed was hers to control. The next confrontation came swiftly. It was another one-on-one meeting. This time, Robert had asked Jasmine to meet with him to discuss the next phase of the campaign. As she entered his office, she was surprised to see Victoria sitting there as well, her usual cool demeanor replaced with something colder, something sharper. "Jasmine, please sit down," Robert said, gesturing toward the empty chair beside Victoria. Jasmine's stomach tightened as she took a seat. She could feel the weight of both their gazes on her, and for a moment, she wondered if she had done something wrong. Had something slipped through the cracks? Was she about to be reprimanded? But Robert spoke first, his voice calm, yet there was an underlying tension in his words. "We've been discussing the future of this firm," Robert began, "and it's clear that the success of the recent campaign has shown just how valuable you are to the company. I've been thinking about your role here, Jasmine. You've proven yourself, and I think it's time to start thinking about the next steps." Jasmine's heart raced, her mind trying to process what Robert was saying. Was he offering her a promotion? A leadership role? The possibilities were endless, but the anxiety crept back in. Before she could respond, Victoria cut in, her voice smooth but laced with a subtle edge. "Robert, I have to be honest," she said, turning her gaze toward Jasmine. "While I admire Jasmine's work on the campaign, I don't think we're ready to make such a significant leap. The position we're discussing is a high-stakes one, and I'm not sure Jasmine is the right person to handle it. She's still too unpolished." Jasmine could feel her blood begin to boil. There it was again, Victoria trying to undermine her at every turn. This wasn't about her abilities. It was about Victoria's bruised ego, and Jasmine wasn't about to let her get away with it. "I've worked harder than anyone in this office to get to where I am," Jasmine said, her voice steady but firm. "I've put in the time. I've put in the work, and I've earned my place here. If you want someone who will keep things safe and predictable, then I'm not your person. But if you want someone who can lead, innovate, and drive change, then I am." Victoria's eyes narrowed as Jasmine spoke, but she didn't say a word. Instead, Robert leaned forward, a small smile forming on his lips. "Jasmine," he said, his voice low but approving, "I've seen the way you've handled the challenges here. You're right. You're not the kind of person to settle for mediocrity. You push boundaries and you make things happen." Jasmine felt a surge of pride. She could feel the validation in Robert's words, but she also knew that the battle was far from over. Victoria might have been silent for now, but that didn't mean she had given up. She would continue to fight for control, to try to find ways to keep Jasmine from moving forward. But Jasmine was no longer afraid. She had fought for every inch she had gained, and she wasn't about to let anyone take it from her. "I'll prove it to you," Jasmine said, her eyes locked on Robert. "Give me the chance, and I won't disappoint." Robert nodded, his gaze shifting between the two women. "We'll discuss this further," he said, his voice signaling the end of the conversation. As Jasmine stood to leave, she caught Victoria's eye. There was no smile, no congratulations. Just the cold, calculating stare of someone who wasn't willing to admit defeat. But Jasmine wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She walked out of the office with a quiet sense of triumph. She had made her case, and she had done it on her terms. The firm would never be the same, and neither would she. But as the door closed behind her, Jasmine couldn't shake the feeling that the storm was far from over. She had earned respect, but the war for control was just beginning. Jasmine barely slept in the days following her meeting with Robert. The weight of the responsibility ahead of her pressed down on her chest like a 100-pound stone. Leading the new venture was an opportunity she couldn't afford to take lightly, but it was also a challenge unlike anything she had ever faced. Her mind raced, the pressure building with every new detail she had to account for, every decision she had to make. She found herself at the office early every morning, staying late each night, reviewing reports, meeting with her team, brainstorming strategies. The task seemed endless, but Jasmine pushed forward. She knew the future of the firm, her future, depended on how well this new project went. Her colleagues, though still wary, were more cooperative. There was a shift in the air, a subtle respect that had begun to grow around her. People started listening when she spoke, taking her seriously in a way they hadn't before. It felt good, but the work was far from easy. She was constantly aware of the fact that while she had earned this role, the challenges had only begun. Victoria, of course, had not been idle. The quiet tension between her and Jasmine simmered, always present but never overtly expressed. Victoria had retreated into the shadows, watching Jasmine's every move. She never directly confronted Jasmine, but Jasmine knew that the power struggle was far from over. It was just a matter of time before Victoria made her move. She was too calculated, too prideful to let someone like Jasmine take the lead without a fight. One late afternoon, as Jasmine was wrapping up a meeting with her team, she received an unexpected message. It was from Robert. He wanted to meet with her in his office immediately. Her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't unusual for Robert to send such messages. He was the CEO after all. But there was something about the timing that felt off. She had just wrapped up a major project, and the venture was well on its way. What could this be about? She walked toward his office with a mix of anticipation and caution. As she entered, Robert was standing by the window, looking out over the city. His face was unreadable, a slight frown on his brow. "Jasmine, come in," Robert said, his voice neutral. "I need to talk to you about something important." Jasmine sat down across from him, trying to read his expression. There was no warmth in his voice today, just business, something that immediately set her on edge. "I've been hearing some concerns from the board," Robert said, his gaze shifting toward her. "They're worried about the direction you're taking with the new venture. They think we're expanding too quickly. Some are saying we're not ready to take such a bold leap." Jasmine's stomach clenched. The board? She had expected some level of resistance, but she hadn't anticipated this. The venture was ambitious, yes, but it was exactly what the firm needed. She had thought Robert was fully behind her. "Robert, this is the right move," Jasmine said, her voice firm but her mind raced. "We've done the research. We've calculated the risks. We can't afford to wait any longer. We'll fall behind the competition." Robert nodded slowly, but his expression remained serious. "I agree with you, Jasmine, but the board doesn't see it the same way. They're demanding we take a step back, reevaluate the plan, and hold off on some of the more aggressive parts of the expansion." Jasmine's heart sank. She couldn't afford to lose momentum now. The whole project was on the verge of taking off. If they pulled back, the firm would lose the edge they needed. "I can't let that happen," Jasmine said, her voice resolute. "I've already convinced key people on the team, and I've got the numbers to back it up. The plan we have is solid. We can't let indecision hold us back." Robert studied her, his gaze sharp. "I know, and I want you to continue pushing forward, but you need to understand that you don't have full control of the company. There are other forces at play here." Jasmine's eyes narrowed, and she sat up straighter. "Are you saying that the board can just override me, Robert? After everything I've done?" Robert hesitated before responding. "I'm not saying that, Jasmine, but you need to be prepared. There are people here who feel that this venture is too risky, and they're not going to sit quietly. Victoria, for example, is among the loudest voices against it. She's been lobbying for a more cautious approach. Jasmine's breath caught in her throat. Victoria. It was no surprise. She had seen this coming, but hearing it from Robert himself was different. Victoria's influence had always been powerful, but Jasmine had assumed she had lost that power once she had lost her position in the company. It seemed that wasn't the case. "What do you want me to do?" Jasmine asked, her voice low, her mind already whirring with ideas. "I want you to stay the course," Robert said, his voice firm. "But I also want you to understand that there may be more resistance ahead. The board is split on this. You'll need to gather more support, especially from people who are still on the fence. Victoria is a key figure in this, and her influence could turn the tide against you. You need to neutralize that." Jasmine's heart pounded. Robert was giving her the green light to move forward, but he was also warning her that the battle wasn't over. The real war was just beginning. Victoria still had her supporters, and those who had once doubted Jasmine were looking for any excuse to take her down. If she was going to succeed, she couldn't just rely on her own abilities. She would need allies, strong ones. "I'll handle it," Jasmine said, her voice more confident than she felt. "I'll make sure we have the backing we need, and I'll deal with Victoria." Robert gave a tight nod. "Good. But remember, Jasmine, power here isn't just about who's the smartest or the most qualified. It's about who has the influence. And right now, you need to build your own." As she left Robert's office, Jasmine's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and strategies. She wasn't just fighting for the project now. She was fighting for control over the very direction of the company. And if she wanted to win, she had to outmaneuver the very people who had tried to sabotage her from the start. Victoria might have lost the battle, but she hadn't lost the war. Jasmine knew what she had to do next. She wasn't going to wait for victory to be handed to her. She was going to take it. Jasmine spent the next few days preparing for the battle ahead. The conversation with Robert had been a wake-up call, one that made her realize just how precarious her position was. Despite her success, despite everything she had accomplished, she was still seen as a threat by those in power. And the biggest threat of all was Victoria, whose influence stretched farther than Jasmine had anticipated. If she wanted to secure her future at the firm, Jasmine knew she had to neutralize Victoria's opposition. She wasn't going to back down. She had worked too hard to let anyone take this from her. But she couldn't do it alone. She needed allies, people who saw the vision she had for the company, people who believed in her leadership. Jasmine knew that the first person she needed to win over was Sandra. Her mentor had always been in her corner, but Jasmine hadn't yet asked for her full support in this battle. Sandra had given her guidance and advice, but now, Jasmine needed her to be an active participant. She needed her to be her ally in the war for control. One afternoon, after another long day at the office, Jasmine met Sandra for coffee in a quiet cafe nearby. The warm light and soft murmur of other patrons provided a welcome respite from the cold corporate environment of the office. Sandra sat across from her, her usual calm demeanor betraying a flicker of curiosity as Jasmine laid out the situation. "I need your help," Jasmine began, leaning forward. "Victoria's positioning herself as the obstacle to this new venture. She's working behind the scenes to sway the board against me, and she's got powerful allies. Robert's already warned me, but I need more than just his approval. I need to build a coalition. I need people who are willing to back me, to support the vision we've put forward." Sandra's eyes narrowed as she listened, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee cup. "I know what you're up against, Jasmine. You've been working for this moment, but power isn't just about convincing people that your ideas are good. It's about knowing who has leverage and using that leverage wisely." "I know," Jasmine replied. "I'm not looking to play dirty, but I need to start building my support base. I can't do it alone." Sandra studied her for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she nodded slowly. "You've always been resourceful, Jasmine, but you need to be strategic. If you want to win this battle, you need to play it carefully. You can't just confront Victoria head-on. That would only escalate things. You need to build trust, gather those who are uncertain about the current direction, and you need to make sure that when you finally strike, it's a move they can't ignore." Jasmine felt a sense of relief wash over her. Sandra had always been the voice of reason, the one who had guided her through the toughest times. With her support, she knew she could move forward more confidently. "I'll do whatever it takes," Jasmine said, her voice firm. "I've already got the backing of a few key people in the firm, but I need to make sure the board sees the value in the new venture. I need to change the narrative, and I need you to help me get to those who are on the fence." Sandra smiled, a small, knowing smile. "I'll help you, Jasmine, but remember, the best way to win a war is to ensure that your enemies fight each other while you stand unscathed in the middle. If you want Victoria's allies to turn on her, you need to play it smart. Don't just focus on the battle. Focus on the bigger picture. You'll need to expose weaknesses, plant seeds of doubt." Jasmine nodded, feeling the fire ignite inside her again. This was it. She wasn't just fighting for her position anymore. She was fighting for the future of the company, for her vision, for the team that had trusted her. She wasn't going to let Victoria or anyone else sabotage everything she had worked for. The next few days were spent gathering information and forming a plan. Jasmine didn't go after the obvious targets first. She knew that confronting Victoria head-on would only give her ammunition to fight back. Instead, she began by cultivating relationships with members of the board who had remained neutral. People who, in their uncertainty, had become pawns in Victoria's hands. One of the first people Jasmine reached out to was Ben, a senior vice president who had always kept a low profile. Ben was respected for his financial acumen, but he didn't have a particularly strong stance on the new venture. He was one of the board members who was on the fence, and Jasmine knew that if she could convince him, others would follow. They met for lunch at a small restaurant, a casual setting that gave Jasmine the chance to talk openly. As they sat down, Jasmine cut straight to the point. "Ben, I need to talk to you about the new venture," Jasmine said, her tone direct. "I know you've been uncertain about the direction we're taking, but I need you to understand how critical it is for the firm's future. If we don't take these risks now, we'll fall behind our competitors. This is our chance to lead." Ben studied her carefully, his fingers drumming lightly on the table. He didn't respond immediately, but Jasmine could feel the wheels turning in his mind. "Jasmine," he said after a long pause, "I respect your vision, but there's a lot of uncertainty around this move. The board isn't all on the same page, and I've heard concerns about whether this is the right time." Jasmine leaned in, her voice steady. "I understand the concerns, but if we don't take this leap, someone else will. Our competitors are already ahead of us in some key areas. This isn't just about expanding, it's about positioning ourselves for the future. I need your support, Ben, and with it, we can bring the others around." Ben was silent for a moment, clearly weighing his options. Jasmine knew this was a make-or-break moment. "I'll consider it," Ben said finally, his expression softening. "But you're right. We do need to be bold, and I think I can get a few others to join me." It wasn't a complete victory, but it was a start. With Ben on her side, Jasmine knew she had a strong ally, someone who could help her sway the others. It was a small victory in a larger war, but each piece of support she gathered brought her closer to her ultimate goal. Over the next week, Jasmine reached out to more of the board members, carefully crafting her message, addressing their concerns, and slowly building her coalition. She knew that Victoria wouldn't go down without a fight, but Jasmine was no longer just reacting. She was in control. The firm was on the brink of a major shift, and Jasmine was at the center of it all. As the pieces began to fall into place, she knew that the next time she faced Victoria, the stakes would be higher than ever. But this time, Jasmine wouldn't be the one on the defensive. She was ready to strike, and when she did, it would be with the full force of her allies behind her. The battle for control had only just begun. The final showdown came sooner than Jasmine had expected. The board meeting was scheduled, and with it, the firm's future was set to be determined. The venture that Jasmine had worked so hard to build was now on the table, and it would be voted on by the board members. She had gathered her allies, slowly and carefully, and now it was time to see if all her efforts would pay off. She walked into the boardroom with a calm but determined posture. Her heart was steady, her focus clear. She had the support of Ben and several other key members, but Victoria's grip on the remaining board members was still strong. Jasmine knew that if she couldn't win over the last few undecided members, the vote would go in Victoria's favor. She had to fight with everything she had. Victoria was already seated at the head of the table, her usual confident demeanor now replaced with a cold, calculated gaze. She gave Jasmine a polite nod as she entered, but there was no mistaking the tension in the air. Victoria knew that this was her last chance to regain control. As the meeting began, Robert Langley spoke first, outlining the new venture's objectives and the potential risks. He acknowledged Jasmine's leadership, praising the innovative ideas that had been presented. But there was no denying that the room was still divided. Some were hesitant. The fear of failure was palpable, and the potential loss seemed too great for some to risk. Victoria had clearly made her case to the more cautious board members, warning of the dangers of rushing into something untested. Jasmine's turn came next. She rose from her seat, feeling the weight of the moment pressed down on her. But she wasn't afraid. She had prepared for this. She knew exactly what she needed to say. As she began to speak, she could feel the room's focus shifting to her, the silent tension building as she laid out the future of the company. "This venture is not just about a business opportunity," Jasmine said, her voice strong. "It's about the firm's place in the future. We cannot afford to wait. The market is changing, and if we don't adapt, we will lose our edge. We have the talent. We have the vision. But we need the courage to act now. I believe in this company. I believe in this team. And I believe that if we make this move, we will set the stage for our success in the years to come." She paused, looking around the room, meeting the eyes of those who had remained silent. "But this is about more than just the numbers. It's about leadership. And I am ready to lead us through this change. I'm not asking for permission. I'm asking for trust. Trust that we can do this together." There was a moment of silence, and then Ben spoke up. His voice, once hesitant, now carried a weight of conviction. "I've been on the fence, but Jasmine is right. If we don't take this step, we'll fall behind. We've seen the competition grow, and if we wait too long, we won't have a chance. I'm in favor of moving forward with the plan." Jasmine felt a surge of hope. Ben's words had hit the mark, and the room seemed to shift ever so slightly. One by one, other board members spoke in favor of the venture. Victoria's allies, though reluctant, began to waver. The support for Jasmine grew, and it was clear that the tide was turning in her favor. Victoria sat motionless, her face frozen in a mask of frustration. She had lost control of the narrative, and there was nothing she could do to turn the tide. When the vote came, the result was clear. The venture passed. Jasmine had won. As the room erupted into applause, Jasmine allowed herself a brief moment of relief. She had done it. She had fought for this opportunity, and now it was hers. The future of the firm was in her hands, and she had earned the trust of those who had once doubted her. As the applause died down, Jasmine turned to Victoria. There was no need for words. Their battle was over. Victoria's defeat was complete. She had tried to stand in Jasmine's way at every turn, but in the end, Jasmine had outmaneuvered her. Victoria stood up slowly, her eyes cold as she gave Jasmine a final look. "You may have won this time," she said quietly, her voice tight with bitterness. "But remember, power shifts. Nothing lasts forever." Jasmine nodded, her face calm but resolute. "We'll see," she said softly, her voice unwavering. With that, Victoria left the room, and Jasmine took her place at the head of the table. She was the new force at the firm, the one who would shape its future. As the others gathered around, congratulating her and offering their support, Jasmine knew that this was only the beginning. Jasmine sat in her office that evening, the weight of the day's victory still sinking in. The view from her window was breathtaking. The city sprawled beneath her as the sun began to set. The hustle of the world outside felt distant now, as if she were seeing it all from a different place, a place where she was in control. The firm was hers to lead now. The new venture, the project that had once seemed so risky, would be the cornerstone of its success. She had proven herself in ways she had never imagined possible, overcoming every obstacle, every doubt, every person who tried to hold her back. But more than that, Jasmine had proved something to herself. She had always known she was capable of greatness. But in the end, it wasn't the accolades or the success that mattered. It was the journey. The journey of standing firm, of refusing to let anyone else define her, of fighting for what she believed in, even when the odds were stacked against her. As the last of the day's light faded, Jasmine took a deep breath, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The battle had been hard. The price had been high. But in the end, she had claimed her place at the top. And this was only the beginning. The future was wide open, and Jasmine was ready for whatever came next. Her story was no longer just about proving herself to others. It was about showing the world what she was truly capable of. And as she leaned back in her chair, a quiet smile played at the corners of her lips. This was her moment, and it was only the beginning of her legacy.